Welcome back, stranger. I am glad to see you have stuck around to listen to the second part of my testimony to the Absalom Academy of Law tonight. As you can probably tell, some good folk from the Temple of Sarenrae were on hand to assist my voice, so I should be able to continue speaking in good form. In a few moments, the end of the recess will be called, and I will have to return to the upturned wooden box that substitutes for a lectern here in the Learned Pig. I think some of the students have already succumbed to the cleansing flow of alcohol and may find themselves quite unable to argue their points effectively tonight. Perhaps this is why the final verdict is left to our titular porcine friend in the wig over there. This second half will focus entirely on the High Council, which is significantly smaller, more powerful, and less democratic than its lower counterpart. Although I admit that I am not actually sure which fancy political adjective best describes it. It's largely oligarchic, but in a way that is mediated by secret laws and powerful magics. Now's the time. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. So, as I covered in the first half of my testimony, the Low Council largely consists of powerful politicians, influential religious leaders, and wealthy nobility. However, all of them must submit to their senior chamber. That would be the High Council, the traditional leaders of Absalom, overseen by the Primarch, who is both therefore the head of government and the head of state for Absalom. If you were present for my tour of the Wise Quarter, then you may recall my comments about there being 13 High Council seats present in the Grand Council Hall. However, most people have never taken the time to see them, and from those who have, they've seldom counted them. So it is a popular belief that there are only 12 positions available, and under normal circumstances when the Primarch is not missing, 2 of these could be filled by a single individual, leading to only 11 High Councillors. And for the most part, this is true. Nevertheless, 13 seats exist, and I will explain why in good time. First, though, let me introduce each High Councillor and the role they hold. I will proceed alphabetically, excepting the Primarch, whom I save to the end. The first seat is held by the Captain of the Starwatch, presently a Cilia of Gear. The Starwatch is Absalom's gendarmerie, fulfilling a role halfway between citywide police and military force. They are responsible for serious inter-district crime and non-magical security threats originating within Absalom itself, and are based in Starwatch Keep beyond the walls, overlooking the Flotsam graveyard. Unlike the District Guard forces, which answer to their local councils, the Starwatch is the policing arm of the Grand Council itself, and as such frequently finds itself drawn into disputes between powerful politicians. I should also note that the cognomen of Gear is a style frequently chosen by officers in the Starwatch that represents loyalty to the Primarch. Recently, many in the First Guard have chosen to style themselves of Winsel instead, which has significantly increased tensions between the two groups. The second seat is held by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is responsible for the Office of Taxation and the Absalom Mint, thereby gaining access to all of the city's direct finances. I hardly need to tell you how powerful this role is. It is held by Scion Lord Kirkis of House de Mac, who might be the single wealthiest man in the city. Luckily, Scion Lord Kirkis has a reputation for caution and financial sense, yet he also seems to withdraw for weeks or even months at a time, when his office is instead represented by his sister, Lady Nymara. Thirdly, we have the Chief Sanitation Commissioner, currently one Lorette. Keeping a city running is dirty work, and Lorette seems to have taken this both literally and metaphorically. He is probably the most hated, and certainly the most caricatured man in the whole city. Honestly, it is impressive how blatantly corrupt the Sanitation Commission is, strong-armed by Lorette's own Sewer Commission and his allies of the Street Sweeping Commission and the Trash Picking Commission. His nickname is Lord Filth, though you should never say that within earshot of anyone who works for the Commission. Fourthly, a seat is held by the Commander Militant of Absalom, a title shared alongside that of Captain of the First Guard, the city's most senior military officer. The First Guard has quite an exaggerated presence in the city by way of its numerous fortresses and the incredible thickness of their walls, but in reality they are prohibited from operating beyond 20% capacity outside times of war. The Commander Militant is currently one Chun Hye-sung, who is the most recent High Counselor, having been appointed by the acting Primarch following his own ascension to the role. The Commander Militant role is special, because it is the only one beyond the Primarchs that cannot simply be revoked through basic politics. It is a lifetime office, unless the Grand Council formally finds its holder incompetent, or they are executed following a conviction by none lower than the city's First of Laws. Fifth, a High Council seat is held by the Diplomatic Minister of Absalom, a role that is obviously focused on the external realities of being a flourishing nation. To that end, the Diplomatic Minister, currently Feridan Severus, is responsible for managing Absalom's vast network of ambassadors and spies that is weaved throughout Galarion's other nations. Sixth, we return to the First of Laws, Absalom's most senior judge. This is a shortened title that varies by the gender of the office holder, so currently it is correct to say First Lady of Laws. Scion Lady Neferpatra of House Ankarman, to be exact. A cleric of Pharasma by training, Scion Lady Neferpatra might just be the most influential politician in the city on account of being a High Counselor, head of a major noble family, and senior clergy within the church of possibly the most powerful deity known to mortals. Despite all this, she is a reasonable and balanced politician who has not yet abused any of her offices to my knowledge. Seventh, in a similar capacity, a seat is held by the First of Spells. Here is where I must formally acknowledge that there is a disconnect between the de jure First of Spells and the de facto First of Spells. The former is held by Lord Gear of House Gix, who has also been Absalom's Primarch for over 60 years. However, since his disappearance in 4717, the position has been held instead by the wizard Garethal Brighteyes. This role is responsible for oversight of all centres of magical learning and study in the city, particularly the Arcana Miriam. To that end, the First of Spells is granted unparalleled access to their vaults and secrets that most mages would murder to uncover. Perhaps it is for the best, then, that Brighteyes is typically presented as a joyless bureaucrat who has no interest in city politics. He will immediately return the position to Lord Gear, if he himself were ever to return to accept it. The 8th seat is held by the Harbormaster, currently Scion Lady Adrielle of House Fearlan. This role is small but crucial, as the Harbormaster is in charge of the Harbormaster's Grange based on Pilot Island in the Flotsam Graveyard, which itself is responsible for tax collection on inbound ships. To that end, the Harbormaster is also charged with ensuring those ships can actually find their way to the docks safely, which would be quite the challenge without the assistance of the Pilots Union, I must say. Finally, this office must ensure that imports and exports are managed correctly. While Absalom is wealthy, trade must flow in both directions, and the city at the center of the world is particularly reliant on its partners for pack animals and timber products, both of which are in relatively short supply here on Kortos. The 9th seat is surprisingly inconspicuous within Absalom proper, for it is reserved for the Kortos Viceroy, whose job it is to oversee the so-called Absalom beyond Absalom, in other words, its territories beyond the city limits. The rigorous laws and regulations drafted here do not always find their way as quickly or as rigidly to Diabel, Escadar, Atari, and other settlements as one would hope, and the Viceroy must ensure that these inefficiencies are corrected. The current Kortos Viceroy is Yares Molinaro, a suspiciously close ally of the Kortos Consortium. The 10th seat is reserved for the Sea Lord of Absalom, a title traditionally claimed by the Primarch, but currently held by one Lerefis of House Kethlin. The Absalomian navy is not as famous as its first guard, yet in many ways it is considerably more important. This is a fact not lost on the Sea Lord, who is a staunch traditionalist and who vehemently opposes anything proposed by Winsel Starborn, almost on principle. While he takes his role seriously and spends at least half of his time on the Isle of Erin, the efficacy of the navy has notably decreased under his watch. The penultimate 11th seat is held by Absalom's Trade Minister, who oversees all of the guilds, shops, and services offered within the city. Whatever makes it past the Harbormaster to enter the docks falls under their domain, economically speaking, that is. By its nature, this is a role that demands an ability to socialize with the city's elite, particularly the guildmasters, But this quality seems lacking in its current office holder, the gnome Grendul Fleng. While undoubtedly a brilliant economist and statistician, he has managed to arouse the ire of several of the city's most prominent guildmasters, including those seated on the low council. So it remains to be seen how secure his position is in the long term. And finally, we come to the office of Primarch itself. Elected from among the other High Councillors, the Primarch of Absalom represents the state on the world stage, directs its military forces, and holds the power to veto just about anything otherwise passed by the Grand Council. Furthermore, it is a lifetime appointment, whereas all the other High Councillors must seek confirmation each year. Lastly, the Primarch has the sole authority to convene the Grand Council for sessions, meaning that they can simply prevent it from meeting should they believe doing so would be to their advantage. Primarch Geard has been temporarily replaced by Winsel Starborn, a former officer in the First Guard who distinguished himself first as the Grand Council's Aslanti Keep representative, then as Siege Lord in 4717. A legendary warrior with little interest in high politics, acting Primarch Starborn has a keen strategic mind, which he has put to use attempting to regenerate the Precipice Quarter and defending the city from the forces of the Whispering Tyrant, the Lich Tar-Baphon. It was Starborn who authorized the Knights of Lastwall to re-establish themselves in his city, and it was Starborn who pushed for the creation of the Agents of Edgewatch to reclaim the former Beldrin's Bluff. It is a testament to the acting Primarch's integrity that he has not yet moved to declare the missing Primarch Gear deceased, despite having amassed more than enough influence to do so. We are now coming to the end, but first I need to explain the process by which Absalom's High Councillors are selected, for there are no elections held for their offices. However, due to an ancient quirk in city law, I need to preface this section by hereby disclaiming that this is entirely hypothetical and speculative. I am in no way stating that this is true or the events described are real. I am not saying that it is illegal to discuss this in Absalom, but if it were hypothetically prescribed under the law, then I would be duty-bound, theoretically, to ensure that this is not considered factual information, lest I find myself thrown into the black whale for violating definitely non-existent laws. Thank you very much. Now, with that out of the way, there could exist 12 powerful artifacts, blessed by Eredon himself, that serve as the badges of office for High Councillors. These could be called the Cornucopias, resembling perhaps arcane horns that are capable of producing an almost endless supply of food and drink in times of siege. Moreover, these could be enchanted to enable their holders to recognize one another, thereby preventing any counterfeit cornucopias from infiltrating the political system, even if they were similarly enchanted. Acquiring and presenting a cornucopia at the annual secretive meeting of the High Council known as the Starstone Exaltation could then be the way to guarantee yourself a position on the Council. You would then be free to participate in the election of the Primarch if one was needed, who, after selecting a role for his own cornucopia, would then oversee the distribution of offices to the other cornucopia holders. This could explain why certain figures, who should have little influence and fewer friends, have been able to retain powerful offices long after their welcome has expired. So long as they held one of the cornucopias, then they also held their seat on the High Council. This could also explain why there are 13 High Council seats in the Grand Hall. 12 seats would be reserved for the cornucopia holders, while the 13th could be held for the Primarch, who needs one to be elected but subsequently would be free to give it away, for the position is lifelong and irrevocable thereafter. Of course, it would be folly to do so, for the other High Councillors would surely seek to dispatch them to claim the Primarch's title for themselves, but it is hypothetically possible. And finally, this could also explain why High Council business is always so mysterious, and their appointments so strange and sometimes seemingly arbitrary. This would explain why the High Council roles have changed over the years. Did you know, for example, that the position of a city planner has been a High Council one in the past, yet it is presently part of the Low Council? Of course, this is all strictly hypothetical, and no such items exist, so help me Eredon. Well, there we have it, my friends. That is the Grand Council of Absalom, in all its ancient, enigmatic, particular glory. It has been a pleasure and a privilege to be able to address the students of the Absalom Academy of Law tonight, as well as our other esteemed guests and, of course, the learned pig himself. I must bid you adieu for now, but I am sure that the debate will proceed with the utmost sincerity and unassailable logic, much like those of the Grand Council itself. Thank you, and good night. As for you, stranger, you are welcome to join me on my tours of Kortos that are upcoming in the near future. Given the enthusiastic response to my summary of centaurs that I gave this afternoon, I would first like to take the opportunity to elaborate a little on another distinguished Kortosian community that lies beyond the city's influence. Nevertheless, for now, please enjoy the forthcoming debate, and I will see you back here on the morrow for my promised elaborations. Well, until then.